Good afternoon, friends. Massimo Zortea from Trento and my friends of ESIC. The webinar series managed and proposed by the UNESCO Chair in Engineering for Human and Sustainable Development. After the two episodes on energy utilities and wash utilities, green energies, and wash utilities, now it's the time of wash mapping with three outstanding hosts, Ricard Giné, Rachele Amerini, and Michael Montani. But first of all, let me introduce the moderator, fantastic moderator, Luigi Inek, former students and now protagonist inside the UNESCO chair. Today we are recording as usual, so we can recover all the passages of this web seminar, but at the same time we can recover all the materials, PowerPoint presentations, etc., and the schedule of the other episodes in the website of the UNESCO chair. And probably you also are interested in gaining the ESICs, but about the recognition, I am passing the floor to Luigi Inek. Am I forgetting anything, Livia? No, so let's pass quickly the floor to the fantastic moderator, Luigi.
Thank you, Massimo, for the introduction. So regarding the practical infos about how to get the credit of type F, I remind you that students of the University of Trento have to attend the webinars, at least for the 75% of the webinars, as well as complete and pass a final test at the end of the last webinar. For those students that are from the other departments, they have to ask to their department secretaries for the credit recognition. Okay, so now I will present briefly our speakers, and after their talks there will be a room for discussion and a question and answer session. So the title of the seminar today is Mapping Emergencies. Actually, we made use of, let's say, two meanings of the word mapping. The first one is the strict one, that is mapping as drawing or making a map and its features over a specific geographical area. And this will be basically the topic of our first talk of Rachele Amerini and Michael Montani. They are geospatial consultants at the United Nations, and they are also known as UN mappers, and they will tell us that everybody can become a UN mapper. And yeah, by using a geospatial information system, GIS, they will explain to us the role of mapping waterways in the UN peacekeeping missions within the Unite Maps project. But as I said, mapping has also a, let's say, broader meaning in the sense of discovering or giving information about something. And that is related to the second talk of Ricard Giné. He's a program manager at the Stockholm International Water Institute. And he will talk about how 84 countries managed the current coronavirus pandemic situation in terms of WASH services, that are the water and sanitation hygiene services. So as you maybe have picked, both of the two talks are related to emergencies. The first talk is related to conflict situations, and our UN mappers will explain us how to promote peace in these areas, while of course the talk of Ricard is related to the current coronavirus pandemic situation. So I leave the stage to Rachele and Michael, and thank you for your attention. You have more or less 20-25 minutes.
Thank you, Luigi. So maybe I can start by sharing the screen. Tell me whether you can see something or not.
Yes, we do.
Okay, perfect. So yes, as Luigi was saying, both me and Rachele work for the United Nations Global Service Center, which is the logistic base of the United Nations. It is based in Brindisi in southern Italy. And we are running this program called Unite Maps, which is a particular program in which the United Nations is starting to approach OpenStreetMap as a global repository of geospatial information. So I will start with an introduction of OpenStreetMap. So OpenStreetMap is basically a global database of geospatial features that everyone in the world can edit at any time. So everybody in the world can create, modify, or delete geographic information. So basically everything from buildings to residential areas, roads, names of shops, and so on. Similarly to Wikipedia. So, the function is almost the same. In Wikipedia, we can create, modify, and delete articles. And in OpenStreetMap, we can do the same by using specific editors to trace over satellite imagery in order to draw our maps. The nice thing of OpenStreetMap is that it is not only a citizen science project, but it is also a community. So there are many volunteers and mappers mapping all around the world, and not only, from the United Nations, but also from local groups that are editing in different countries, as well as other NGOs. Also, there are also companies, so people making business out of these maps. So, entering the details of the Unite Maps program, with this program, the logistic base is providing topographic maps for the UN peacekeeping missions, so to the blue helmets in the field, in order to provide services like peacekeeping and peace building in the country stormed by conflict. So the program has been started by the UN Global Service Center, but also by the UN headquarters especially the Geospatial Information Section in New York, and 3 peacekeeping missions, which are UNSOS, MONUSCO, and MINUSCA, which are working respectively in Somalia, Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Central African Republic. So the idea is to produce topographic maps and also operational geoservices to provide support to the peacekeepers in the field by helping them in their field endeavors like search and navigation, and also security, to bring support to endangered villages. So within this program, we are both using OpenStreetMap as base map data. So we are underlying the data coming from OpenStreetMap in the production of our services. And we are also mixing it with UN authoritative data that many times can be sensible, like boundary information, which can have like political, let's say, consequences, but also village names and other sensible information. So we are mixing these 2 data sources in order to provide the peacekeepers with these geoservices. So we are offering different types of services, ranging from global base maps, in which we are providing basically contextual information with all the physical features that peacekeeper can find on the ground, but also image maps with collection of UN managed satellite imagery, operational maps, which are, let's say, web services in which the field mission can carry on and visualize the operational activities. And we are also going to produce global three-dimensional solutions to visualize the data in 3 dimensions, and also geocoding applications in order to, for the personnel to search for particular features and points of interest in the maps that we are editing all together, and directional features in order to plan routing of convoys, especially, let's say, tanks and containers within the countries in which they are operating. We are doing all of these, both taking OpenStreetMap as an open database in which we can either edit and take the data to produce our services, as well as with the Maps on Demand application, which is an application developed by our developers in the United Nations Global Service Center. So this is an application in which personnel in the field and also us, let's say, can use it in order to produce PDF maps, starting from, georeferenced PDF maps, starting from, basically no skill. So everybody, even non-GIS professionals, can use this application to produce their own maps in the field that will probably also print them with, with printers in a paper form. So we have topographic maps, which are which is our main product. These are 50K scale maps and also 100K scale. And these are presenting all the physical and human features that you can find usually in topographic maps. So villages, residential areas, highways, waterways, land cover and land use, and some relevant point of interest, like point of interest that are obstructing, let's say, the view. For example, like water towers or communication towers. Then we have city maps in which these are 10K scale maps with building footprints and roads in the main cities. And also the nice thing of these maps is that they are showing the point of interest. So the personnel will be able to see like aggregation points in cities, like places of worship, shops, or other amenities. And then we have also focus maps or site maps, which are very detailed topographic maps of UN camps in the field. So, for example, the peacekeeping missions have many camps all over the countries they are operating, and these maps are supposed to, let's say, display in a high detail all the geospatial features present in those camps. So I will give you a brief overview of the MOD application. So this is an application that also our colleagues in the field can access. They can go through this application in which you see many tiles. These are all the 50K topographic maps that we are producing, and especially the areas that have been validated are these ones in gray. They can basically select one map that they would like to print, so one area of interest. So they are telling us what areas of interest they would like to have maps for. And then here they can select one or more maps, and they can download them directly from this web application. And also, they can not only download the topographic maps, but also the urban maps and the site maps. And at the end, they will have this kind of product. So this is a military map. So we are using, let's say, the rendering that is typical of military maps, in which we display topographic information and also, land cover and all the other features. This one is from one village, Makofi in DRC. So you can see all the details with the data coming directly from OpenStreetMap and village names coming from the UN, as well as boundary and topographic information. So the personnel in the from the missions can then download this PDF file and use the printers in the mission to print paper maps and use them for navigation and routing of UN convoys. Coming back to the browser here, okay. So I will jump on the missions that we are supporting. We are working basically with the three founding missions, so UNSOS, MONUSCO, and MINUSCA, in the three countries that I told you before. But we are also supporting MINUSMA, which is working in Mali, and UNISFA, which is bringing support in a region which is between Sudan and South Sudan, and it is called the Abyei region. So the important point of this program is that not only we have internal consultants in order to produce the data on OpenStreetMap. So if you go in the areas that we are working on, you can see clearly our editing. So we have consultants that are editing the map. And the nice thing is that this data is available to everyone. So also, I mean, to local companies or local organizations that are using OSM data. I mean, we are basically sharing our knowledge all together. The important thing is that we are not only doing this, but we are also leveraging with the, let's say, local communities and the global OpenStreetMap community in order to achieve, let's say, a sort of common contribution, so that we can, I mean, enable everyone to give support to the peacekeeping missions, so that everyone can edit the data on OpenStreetMap through collaborative events in order to help us in this endeavor. And we are doing this within the umbrella of the UN Mappers community, and Rachele will talk a little bit about this now. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I will share my screen. So, okay, let me know if you can see it.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so as Michael was saying, in order to engage with the community in OpenStreetMap, Unite Maps created UN Mappers. And UN Mappers is a network of different communities ranging from the UN personnel in the field, so GIS groups, offices, and military and police, to academia, so high schools and universities, but also local communities in the countries where we are working, and also NGOs and remote mappers, volunteer remote mappers from all over the world. So we are providing to them trainings, but we are also hosting events. Among our activities, we have in particular the organization of the tasking manager mapping projects, which are hosted in the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team platform. Here you can see some of our active projects, and also crowdsourced imports from UN databases. So data that the UN is releasing to OpenStreetMap. And we are continuously validating and training our contributors. So they are mapping in our projects, and then there is a validation process to validate the data. Here we have some statistics at the time of speaking. The UN Mappers community, we can see that counts around over 1,000 contributors, and over 3 million of map changes in 2 years, more or less. We have also a leaderboard showcasing our top mappers contributors, let's say. We can see that we have by number of edits and by kilometers of waterways or highways mapped. You will find the link to this wiki page in the PDF presentation. So another important thing is that our contributors are not only mapping in our areas of interest, but also, as we can see, we are interested in Mogadishu area and in the southern part of Somalia. But our mappers, so the UN mappers, are contributing also in other regions of the countries where we are working. In this case, in the northern part of Somalia and in the western part. So as Michael was saying, in our tasking manager, we are supporting with our projects the UN missions in Central African Republic, Mali, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Somalia. Another important thing is that our contributors can find all the instructions on how to map topographic data in our projects. And we are also currently importing waterways in the southern region of Somalia, and the data is provided by UNSOS. We can see that this project of import is only for advanced mappers because the workflow is more complex than the average mapping activity. So, but back to emergency. So when it comes to emergencies, to have available data becomes crucial. Becomes crucial because it's needed to evaluate and to support the decision-making process. Here we have, for Somalia, for example, an article made by UNHCR, which is saying that floods drive over 650,000 Somalis from their homes in 2020. So how we can help, how we can produce this data. Here we see flooding event in Jowar, which is a city in Somalia near Mogadishu. The photo is from 2013, and we can see that thousands displaced by floods and conflicts in this city. So how we can help? Here we have, for example, in the map you can see our import project for the waterways in Somalia. You see that we are working north of Jowar, and the white squares are those where the contributors can help by importing the waterways, while the blue squares that you see here are those that were mapped and that are ready for the validation. Some statistics about this huge work, we can see them here. So regarding waterways, we have mapped 11,000 kilometers of waterways. And in the graph, we can see the trend of waterways mapping in the last 2 years. And we can see how the line is rising, and in recent months we had an increase in activity of the mapping of waterways. So it's clear that when speaking about, for example, flood events, it's very important to have an idea, so at least a basic idea of the waterway network. We are working with high resolution satellite imagery. In this case, we have Maxar. And yes, here we can see the network. No, the result of our mapping is this one. As you can see, we have more or less the complete network mapped. So, and as Michael was saying, the most important thing here is that this data that you can see here is not only available to UN or to UN agencies, but also to any NGO or any researcher that needs to work with this data. And this can be done simply by downloading it from OpenStreetMap. And this really can make a big difference when working in places where we have lack of data, of cartography. So for this, I will share with you now our social media accounts. So you see we are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, Eventbrite, and we also have a direct communication channel on Discord. But you can also drop us an email if you want to propose any collaboration or partnership, or just ask any question about the project. Your contribution can really make the difference. And here we will share with you some useful links about the documentations that we had. We saw the Unite Maps website, but we are working also to have a UN Mappers website and a learning hub to share with the community and with everybody some learning courses about OpenStreetMap and about the topographic mapping. You can find here also all the links to the editing guidelines and to the leaderboard and the statistics and the crowdsourcing contribution heat map. So thank you everyone, and I hope to see you there, so in OpenStreetMap. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachele and Michael. A really interesting presentation. So you have all the contact to get more information and get more involved in this really interesting project. So I will leave the stage to Ricard now, and he will talk about a mapping review of the WASH services in 84 countries as a response to the current coronavirus situation. Thank you, Ricard.
Thank you, Luigi, for the introduction. And yeah, a pleasure being here. Let me share the screen. As Luigi was mentioning before, myself, I'm working at the Stockholm International Water Institute in Sweden. And basically, I think that it was nice I mean, in the introduction, to see that as correctly mentioned by Luigi, mapping has different meanings. And basically what we did here is understanding mapping as a kind of compilation of information, or a kind of compilation of initiatives and measures that governments took and implemented in the COVID response in the WASH sector. So basically, that's what we did. We did that in the framework of a big collaboration with UNICEF that we do have, I mean, in Latin America, in MENA region, and also at the global level. So basically, I guess that you can see the screen, right? Yeah, okay.
Yes, we do, but we can't see you.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay. If you want to turn on the camera. Okay, yeah. Great, thank you.
So Yeah, so here basically the idea was once the pandemic started, we tried in agreement with UNICEF to develop a kind of framework to better understand how countries were reacting and fighting the COVID pandemic from the waste sector. The idea was to structure the response so that it could be useful to guide country responses. I don't know, yeah, I think that it's to guide country responses and basically to improve their efficiency. So basically, first we developed the framework, then we used that framework to identify how countries and mainly all waste sector stakeholders were responding to the pandemic. So basically, the idea was through an identification of 84 countries to better understand how they were reacting, and trying also through webinars and different exchange sessions, try to facilitate South-South country experience sharing, and also through this sharing of information, identify potential response gaps, and then of course try to improve the overall response. Then at the end, what we also wanted, once the pandemic was more or less, let's say, under control, try to identify which were the socio-economic and financial impacts of COVID on services and systems. And here the idea is through this better understanding of the impacts of COVID, trying to increase the resilience of the sector, mainly of waste sector stakeholders, and of course, their ability to prepare for future exposures or future shocks. So basically, it started shortly after the pandemic reached the American and the Caribbean region. It was in conversations with the Latin America Regional Office that we identified a good opportunity to support UNICEF country offices, and then through UNICEF, the different governments in their response. Basically, most countries did not have good instruments or tools to develop a comprehensive response to COVID. And basically the idea was, yeah, to develop a kind of framework so that they or countries could better structure their response. Initially, the framework was structured in 4 big target areas and 38 response measures, but then it evolved up to 5 target areas and 43 response measures. I'm going to talk about later on that. The mapping started in 15 Latin American countries, but then it was expanded to 26 countries in total. It was also expanded to the MENA region, covering 21 countries. And in the end, we, through UNICEF again, covered a total of 84 countries in almost all regions, I mean, low-income regions. The idea is, again, to map all the response, and not only during the emergency, but also during the de-escalation of measures once, I mean, the countries were trying to leave the first phase of the emergency. As I said, the first task was to develop a kind of framework, and the framework was structured in 2 main blocks: those response measures that affected households and institutions in relation to their waste services, and another response block more related to service providers, both in urban and rural areas. For the first block, we identified 3 target areas: those response initiatives that were related on how to intensify and increase awareness raising for hand washing with soap and water. We all know now that hand washing was one of the most important strategies to fight the pandemic. So basically, there were a lot of initiatives there. A second target area related to other infection prevention and control measures, both at the household and in institutions, such as improving cleaning of surfaces, wearing masks, those kind of things. Then the third target area related or included all the response measures that were aimed at increasing the level of service for all people, with a specific focus on vulnerable people. we see here a lot of, for instance, free water initiatives trying to ban disconnection of users from the networks, also trying to reinforce the reconnection of previously disconnected users. So a lot of measures were launched and implemented by countries to secure at least a minimum level of access to almost all population. Then in relation to the second block, basically what we see was one target area related to support utilities so that they could guarantee the continuity of services. And then another block that included all measures related to provide technical and financial support to utilities. So basically the idea is, based on these 5 target areas, what we did is to identify up to 43 specific initiatives, each one related to one of these blocks, so that countries could have a comprehensive framework of what kind of activities they could implement to improve their response from the waste sector. As said, basically we covered 84 countries, and they are visualized in the map. We tried to cover response from all sector stakeholders, governments, utilities, regulators, NGOs, I mean, all type of stakeholders. All information was collected through web-based searches. Although we tried to validate them, it was a limitation of the study, and I'll talk about it later. We used 4 different languages: Spanish, Arabic, French, and English, of course, depending on the region. And basically what we did is, once we identified the specific measures, we classified them based on the 5 targets that I was mentioning before, and also trying to identify if the measure was implemented at the national level or at the subnational level. So as said, we used basically web searches, and to focus mainly on government websites, water and sewerage utility websites, humanitarian development websites, Google Alerts, general Google searches. So basically all the information that we could access through webs, I mean, we tried to integrate that in the mapping. Of course, there are a lot of limitations using this methodology. Basically, that we know that we did not cover all the wash response initiatives in a specific country, because if it was not documented and available in the website, we could not reach this information. Then another potential limitation was that although we tried to verify the information, we did not have good access to all country offices and all governments. So basically what we could somehow map was initiatives that were announced and launched by governments, but not the actual implementation and the efficiency of the implementation. So basically it was the measure, but not the outputs or the outcomes. And then of course, another limitation is that although we tried to keep the mapping for 3 or 4 months from March to June, depending on the country, the situation was very dynamic, was rapidly evolving. So, I mean, again, through web searches, it was not impossible to get a good understanding of the situation in the 84 countries. So that's how the mapping looked like in the end. Basically, we develop a kind of matrix in what we can see is all the initiatives, I mean, in different rows, all the different countries, and for each country and initiative, basically, if we identified any specific initiative of measures, we marked them, either in blue, if the initiative related to a national measure, or in orange, if it was related to a subnational measure. Then, of course, what you need to understand is that beyond each of these marks, there are specific initiatives or measures that countries were implementing. For instance, in Sudan, I mean, the initiative that I'm highlighting here is that in Sudan, there were more than 300 refugees, IDP members that received soap and other hygiene relief items. So this was an initiative. It was, in this case, conducted at the subnational level. So basically, we illustrated it in orange. Basically, in terms of results, what we could see is that regions responded differently to the pandemic. Latin America was quite active, and basically Sub-Saharan Africa and Asia was not were not that active. Of course, this, I mean, we need to understand this response against the context, against the depth of the pandemic. So there were a lot of variables here, but just to show that countries in Latin America showed almost all of them a high level of activity. Then another conclusion that it's interesting is that almost all countries identified measures related to target 1, which means that all countries pushed and implemented initiatives to secure and promote hand washing and hygiene promotion. So that was, as you can see in the graph, all covered by almost all countries. There was kind of good reaction and good response as well in other IPC measures. And on the other hand, what we can see is that the level of activity in relation to other targets was not that high, particularly for those targets that related to support to service providers and support them in ensuring the continuity of wash services. So basically, when it comes to an analysis related to the target, we can see a big difference almost in all regions in relation to the level of response. Then basically what we could see is that, again, a lot of examples found in relation to hygiene promotion, a lot of examples found, again, fighting misinformation on how to, for instance, wash properly the hands, hygiene supplies. I mean, a lot of information as well in relation to how to improve wash in healthcare facilities and isolation centers, and a significant number of measures also to promote continuity of water supply services for households that were not able to afford and facilitate bill payments. Here I'm referring mainly to initiatives or to free water initiatives that basically were beneficiaring those households that, although were not connected to the system, were living in mostly in urban areas. We did not find a lot of measures to support more vulnerable groups such as rural households or households living in informal settlements. Then what we could see is also a lot of gaps in relation to decentralized sanitation. There were not a lot of activities or response measures trying to promote sanitation or public sanitation, sanitation in public spaces. We could see somehow that countries trying to improve their response in relation to specific needs of women and girls were not that high. So there were a lot of gaps there as well. And again, yeah, a lot of gaps in relation to improving the supply chains for water supply and wastewater treatment services. And again, technical and financial support gaps to utilities. And this is tricky because, as you know, I mean, service providers were performing during the pandemic against and in a very complex scenario, so that unless support is soon scaled up for them, a lot of utilities will not be able to perform in the near future. And that's something that is already happening. So how these kind of mapping approaches were employed in the Latin American region, for instance, is that first, it's important to realize that a lot of countries did not have good contingency plans, so they were lacking structured guidelines on how to respond to the pandemic. So basically, the framework that we provided, it was useful there for them, again, to structure the response and to identify gaps. And here, basically, what we can see is that the mapping activities that we conducted with UNICEF received recognition from many WASH stakeholders, such as the World Bank, IDB, Spanish Cooperation, potentially in different academia, fora, and also from different networks, such as Sanitation and Water for All. That inputs from the mapping were used in closed-door webinars with sector ministers. And more at the country level, what we can see is that it was useful to support the response and the preparation of the initiatives that were implemented at the country level. For instance, in Ecuador, we developed multi-stakeholder dialogues with all relevant stakeholders, trying to support them in the preparation of their strategic operational framework or the post-disaster needs assessment. Same happened in Brazil or in Colombia, where again, through multi-stakeholder dialogues with all relevant stakeholders in the country, we could develop more comprehensive responses. And it is to continue this activity through specific focus, basically with a project with IDB, where we will try to develop a kind of toolkit to improve sector resilience to COVID and other health emergencies. And now the focus is in Latin America on the schools. So basically using a similar framework, we are trying to support them in increase their response to be sure that the schools can be open in a secure way, and of course providing adequate wash services. So I'll try to spend just 2 more minutes on a different study. Basically, the idea is that once we had good understanding of the response implemented by countries, there was another request by UNICEF trying to better identify and gain understanding on the impacts of COVID on the sector. And I'm talking, or I'm including, or I'm referring to the sector as both the users, but also the service providers. So basically the idea here, or the aim, was threefold, trying to link the response that I was talking about before to potential impacts, to identify the immediate effects, those that were happening from the very beginning, and try to integrate these immediate effects or link these immediate effects to the context. I mean, of course, the response in Sudan was not the same than the response in Bolivia, because the situation, the pre-pandemic situation was completely different. So that's why we try to identify the context, the contextual elements and the immediate effects. And once we had clarity on these immediate effects, we tried to measure and assess also the short and mid effects, what we call the secondary effects. And here, basically, the study was not trying to focus only on the negative effects, but also on the positive effects, in a way that basically our hypothesis is that if we respond well to this pandemic from the sector, if we learn the lessons, basically, we can strengthen the resilience for future pandemics, and basically we can strengthen the sector overall. So basically here you can see potential negative effects, such as, of course, threatened financial sustainability of providers, and this is already happening, as I was mentioning before. We will see in the future limited investments in new infrastructure, and in countries have, I mean, a lot of constraints in terms of this of their fiscal space, and this will affect and is affecting the waste sector. But as positive effects, we might see, and we have seen, enhanced coordination and communication between, for instance, the waste sector and education to improve the response in schools. We've seen increased innovation and improved efficiency in specific service providers. We have also seen that in specific countries, stakeholders are trying to earmark new financial resources that they were not used to before the pandemic. So that's, again, a good positive effect. We've seen a lot of initiatives trying to secure water. And the question here is that if these initiatives, or if countries, will be able to extend these initiatives, these free water initiatives, after the pandemic, with a specific focus on vulnerable groups, so that they can work towards the realization of the human right to water and sanitation. And finally, it would be ideal, we've not seen that yet, but it would be ideal that in the midterm, we start seeing a kind of green recovery, which means that countries are trying to adapt their service delivery modalities to climate change, and trying to integrate the climate risks into these service delivery approaches. That's all from my side. So I think I've tried to keep to the 20 minutes, but of course, I think that now we do have a kind of question and answer session. So I'll give the floor back to you, Luigi, for the moderation. Thank you.
Thank you, Riccardo, for the complete presentation. And personally, it was really interesting, all the interconnected effects, environmental, social, political, of this current pandemic situation. So as you said, now we have some 40 minutes for discussion and question and answer sessions. So please, if you want to ask something, just turn on your microphone, or if you are too shy, please write in the chat, and we will read your question.
So thank you, everybody, for your presentation. Very interesting from both sides. So I have a first question about the first intervention, about which are the standards that you use for the mapping, and if there is any quality control about that kind of mapping. Because it's, I mean, I imagine there are many people in the field mapping, and how is possible to manage all the information and to have some kind of standard quality?
So this is a very nice question, and as you can imagine, OpenStreetMap is like can be sometimes really. Sorry, is there someone speaking?
Someone was speaking behind me. Don't, yeah.
Okay. So no, yes, as you can imagine, OpenStreetMap is sometimes can be quite messy, because you have people with whatever level of knowledge of GIS that is editing on OSM or on the database, like going through maybe also students from high schools or universities that are maybe starting the first steps within the GIS world, but also you have experienced people or people that maybe is experienced in other fields like IT, for example, rather than the geospatial field. So this is like quite a challenge, but we are running many quality controls in different steps. For example, we are, for the crowdsourcing contribution, we are doing, let's say, a validation beforehand of their contribution before closing our collaborative projects in the Tasking Manager, which is the website that we are using to do collaborative editing. But then our data is then validated another time internally by by our GIS specialists. And at the end, there is a third quality assurance step in which all the maps, let's say, what we are checking in the last step is whether the combined data between UN proprietary data and OSM are correctly translated in the military standard that we are using, which is MGCP. It is like I'm speaking about the rendering and all the, let's say, the tags that we are using. The MGCP standard is like the standard that is used by many nations. So also, it's a standard that was originally created by NATO. So, almost, it's the de facto standard used by military people let's say, in the armies. So the challenge in the quality assurance step is to translate OSM plus the UN data to this standard. So we are not editing directly following that topographic and cartographic standard, but we are checking the, let's say, the quality of this translation between the two types of map. But yes, anyway, there are
challenging
many,
anyway.
yes, many validation steps, and also I think one of the most important points is education of external contributors. Like, we are really focusing on trainings and trying to give like the best editing, let's say, help to newcomers to OSM, or also experienced contributors that would like to approach topographic mapping in particular.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. Other questions?
I have a question for the first relators. Okay, linking with the last answer, I would like to say that I already used the OSM mapping to try to give an help in an African country, okay, in a project. But I would like to ask you about the resolution, because in some cases I had a problem to identify some objects because of the revolution. So are these a problem that can be managed? But which kind of problem are common in mapping remotely, like this case? Thanks.
I don't know, Rachele, if you want to answer, or should I go?
Yes, if you want to.
Okay, so yes, let's say the imagery we are using on OSM is imagery provided by third parties. So we have these satellite companies that are releasing freely their imagery. And the resolution is usually half meter. So, I mean, it's quite high resolution. But the point is that, yes, sometimes can be like worse, depending on the provider or the area that you are mapping specifically. So, I mean, our mapping resolution, let's say, arrives to, is not so accurate because we are editing topographic data, so we don't have to enter, the real detail of what we see on the ground. I mean, we are mapping the main features, let's say, for the navigation mainly. But yes, I think the main challenge of mapping like remotely is retrieving local information. So identifying a point of interest. I think this is like the most challenging thing, like to understand whether one structure can be a water tower, a communication tower, or maybe a building can be a mosque or a church. So it's quite difficult, and for this we are also trying to leverage contribution from local people, so to engage local communities in order to retrieve data related to these particular features. But yes, the main after you have some experience, you get some experience in mapping remotely, you notice that the worst thing is to map what you cannot know, locally. That you have to have field information in order to retrieve this kind of data.
Yes, if I can add, another problem that we are facing is the difference between imagery. So maybe in one imagery provided by Bing, for example, we see a village, and then in another imagery we don't see it. So we ask if this village is there or not. So also because we don't have the dates of the imagery, so it's not always a simple thing to understand which imagery is the correct and the most updated one. So this is another problem that we are facing with the imagery. So thank you for this.
Yes, if I can add on your answer, the point is that you don't have to imagine like maps in Africa and Asia, like let's say the topography and also the urban situation of cities, like a static thing. Is a dynamic thing. Everything is changing from season to season. Like in 6 months' time, you can have like very different situations on the ground, because maybe villages are getting attacked, so people are, bringing everything and going in another place, setting up other villages, or maybe people like in Somalia may be very nomadic, so they have the cattle that they have to move very often to let it graze in the let's say arid Somalia. So there are many situations. Also, rivers that maybe sometimes can be permanent, other times can be intermittent. So sometimes rivers that in dry season are intermittent, so they don't have water, are sometimes used also by, as roads by the local population. So they are using with scooters and cars. They are going through the rivers using them as roads. So I mean, we have this kind of very crazy situation sometimes that are like depending on time, let's say.
Thank you, Michael and Rachele. Other questions?
If I may ask,
Yes.
still on the same topic, more or less, for Michael and Rachele. Did you find it easy? I mean, talking about this problem of recognizing, for instance, interest points, or in let's say developing countries, did you find it easy to have good information from people that have deep knowledge in the area, and I mean mixed with digital knowledge? So I mean I don't I'm sorry. Yes, if in this context, reaching the specific information about the local was easy, but from the locals was easy. And how did you engage the people, more or less? I'm sorry for.
Okay, no, don't worry. So, nice question. Also because it's not easy. It's not easy to find local people, also because working in Africa, for example, in some countries like in Central African Republic, we don't have a OSM community there, and so it's not easy to find somebody there apart from the missions. And also, not always they have a good internet connection, for example. So it depends a lot on the country. For example, in Mali, we have a very active community, and also in DRC. So it depends a lot on the country where we are working. And what we do is to contact. And we are doing trainings or events together, not only always focusing on our specific areas of interest, but we search and we are looking for support them, and trying to. We are trying to, for example, to provide them some connection or some place to gather. This is a project for the future, not now, and so on. I don't know, Michael, if you want to add something about the local communities.
Yes, the idea is, as you were saying, that probably in the future we are going to, let's say, provide specific fundings to these communities in order to grow and let them establish by providing internet connection and places where to map. There are sometimes, yes, very experienced mappers, but the infrastructures, like say digital and physical, are quite challenging. But the nice thing in OSM is that we are not the only ones there. We have many other NGOs and companies that are doing their job, and sometimes also providing funds to the local communities. I was thinking about Mali. They received a fund from the World Bank for a previous project, and this led them to grow the community bases a lot. And they have a nice office in Bamako, and they are also doing like quite great activities also related to gender inclusion. So this is kind of a collaboration. I mean, OSM is kind of a tool to collaborate also between different organizations, let's say.
Yes, and last thing about your question, you were asking also from the remote mapping and the local mapping. when we are doing remote mapping, the last word is always the one from the communities. So if we have mapped a road and they say that this is not a road, this is a waterway, we listen to them because they have the knowledge of the places.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions? We know that Ricard unfortunately has to leave at 7 p.m. if I am correct. So if someone wants to ask something. Otherwise, I have a question for him, a really simple one actually. You mentioned 5 target areas. I was curious about more information of which of these 5 target areas was the most critical to map, let's say, to evaluate in terms of the related initiatives that that were made.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say critical because basically we employed the same method to map the 5 target areas. So, and it was web searches. So basically, what we can say is that, as I said before, we identified more measures related to hygiene promotion, hygiene-related campaigns, than, for instance, specific support to service providers. And this might be a limitation of the study in terms that maybe campaigns were more broadly disseminated than other specific activities. But our understanding is that hand washing has been pushed throughout the pandemic very strong in most countries. And that's why I think that we identified a lot of measures there from different, from different perspectives, in different level of ambitions. But again, I think that in terms of the methods, it was not critical. Our approach was web searches, but basically what we found was, yeah, again, a lot of measures related to hand hygiene and other IPC measures. And on the other hand, we found little examples more related to support to technical and financial support to service providers. And this is critical because, again, they've been working under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure. A lot of measures such as free water initiatives have been conducted by service providers on their own with no support from governments. So they are close to bankruptcy in many cases, and this will challenge the provision of the services in the next months, and unless the situation is completely changed and they start receiving support. So yeah, I wouldn't say critical aspects of the methodology, but yeah, what we found was a lot of hand washing and hand hygiene.
Yeah, and this thing of let's say a little bit of randomness of how the pandemic will go. I think it's another big question of continuing to stay in this kind of let's say yeah, methodology and to validate the results.
Yeah, what I can, basically what we, as I said, we did not have the capacity to validate the initiatives and measures that we identified in the web. Only a few cases where we do have good contacts at the national level through UNICEF and governments, then we could validate, and it was more, a comprehensive validation through multi-stakeholder dialogues. So that's one thing. So in terms of validation, agree, there's a lot of gaps there. And just to say that you've said, I think a good, very important aspect is that the pandemic is evolving, so that response measures are evolving as well. And we did not have the capacity to conduct the mapping after 4 months because it was very time consuming. It was a lot of hours from a lot of staff trying to focus on this. And then we basically got the mapping. But what we are now trying to identify with a focus on the schools is how these response measures are evolving when countries are, let's say, moving from this more emergency situation towards a more kind of recovery. Now, schools are trying to reopen, and there are a lot of activities to be implemented before or to ensure that voice services are secured in schools. So basically, I mean, it's important to see that this framework is not static, but it needs to be flexible enough to be sure that it's well adapted to the context, and basically it's well adapted to the evolution of the pandemic, because it's going to evolve, and the sector needs to be adapted to this evolution. But that's a good point, definitely.
Thank you, Richard. Okay. Other questions?
If I may, Luigi,
yeah,
mapping the impacts, environmental impacts of the pandemic, and for instance, the impacts in terms of sustainability of a peacekeeping operation. As you know, probably the Italian Ministry of Environment launched a program in supporting the DFS environment strategy 5 years ago, and focus on the global service here there in Brindisi. So what about this program of sustainability? And are you mapping also the environmental impacts of peacekeeping operation and humanitarian operation? And the same question could be for you, Ricard, in order to understand what Civile is doing in supporting the analysis and the monitoring of the severe impacts of the pandemic in terms of sustainability.
So maybe I can start. So yes, let's say our project is really focused on providing support to the peacekeepers. So we are really focusing on the operational support rather than the monitoring of the sustainability. Let's say the problem here is that we are divided like in different sections. So we are really focusing on our work. But I guess there are many other people here in the logistic base that are working specifically on monitoring of sustainability. I cannot give like more information because I don't know really. But I know, for example, that in our section we have a specific unit that works in groundwater exploration, and they have like a sustainability. They take sustainability really into account when. For example, creating, let's say, groundwater exploration projects in order to find fresh water near to UN camps. But yes, I don't have many other information related to this.
Let's investigate.
From my side, if I can add, Massimo, just to say that the first mapping was not specifically aimed at mapping humanitarian context. It was more broad. And then what we could see, of course, is a lot of initiatives trying to support basic WASH services in this kind of refugee camps and for more vulnerable populations, but nothing but irrelevant at all, unfortunately. Again, based on the method that we employed. And in the second study, what we were trying to measure this kind of socioeconomic and financial impacts. We, of course, included environmental impacts. And again, we did not see a lot of initiatives trying to support a kind of the environmental conservation of water. And basically, again, on the contrary, what we could see is from the regulatory side, a lot of relaxation measures trying to increase the production of water, despite it had huge impact on the environment. For instance, regulators were not able to follow on service providers in terms of water catchment and in terms of wastewater discharge. We've seen that this kind of relaxing measures in many operators, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. And on the other hand, we've not seen a lot of good examples or good practices trying to learn from the pandemic and increase the resilience of service modalities to be sure that the environmental impact of this activity is kind of reduced or mitigated. We've not seen that, unfortunately.
Thank you, Ricard. So maybe other questions, curiosity from the participants? Guido has joined us. I don't know if you want to say something.
Hello, everybody. No, maybe I missed the presentation, so I was listening to the questions. I say hi to Ricard, and if we close and you don't have to leave in a hurry, maybe we say hi later, just a few minutes.
Okay.
I have a quick curiosity for Ricard. I would like to know how many people worked for the WASH mapping for the pandemic, because it's a huge work. I mean, so I was wondering about how many people should work at to reach the goal. Thanks.
I mean, basically we are a team of 10 people. Most of us were involved, of course, not full time, but I would say that 3-4 full-time equivalent people working 4 months on this mapping. That's yeah. I mean, I think that'd be a good estimation. We also had some consultants at the local level, particularly in MENA, for the Arabic searches. But yeah, I think that's 4 to 5 people working 4 months on this mapping. I think that it's a good estimation. I mean, yeah, as you said, it's time consuming, and mainly that most of the resources that you find at the end, you see that they are not that relevant. So you need to discuss. I mean, again, we could not validate at the country level, but of course we tried to be sure that the initiatives that were mapped were, of course, I mean, relevant and somehow, let's say, valid for the purpose. And that's why we could not continue after June with this, because UNICEF told us that it was good enough.
Yeah, I see. Thanks.
Really a good effort too. Well, I mean, other questions? Okay, I think we can go to the ending of the meeting. I would like to thank you once again, our speakers, Michael, Rachele, Ricard, for their time, for sharing with us their work, their effort in these different type of emergencies, let's say, but and mapping in a different sense, different emergencies. So I would like to thank you all the participants, and stay in touch with the next ESIC seminar that will be exactly the next week, the 28th of April. And Livia will be our new fantastic moderator. And yeah, that's it, I think. And Massimo?
If I may add just a detail, we changed a little the schedule. So we will have another speaker in replacing the Lunelli. So we will keep you in touch about the new schedule. Thanks.
Thank you, Livia.
Thank you.
if you want to turn on your cameras for our picture all together.
Final picture. Tradition.
Yeah.
Tradition.
We have only 25 slots, so I guess only the first 25 are the lucky ones.
The lucky ones, yeah.
Make 2 pictures.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Massimo has taken the picture.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's done. Great, thank you. Have a really nice evening and see you soon.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you, Luigi. Thank you for the
Bye. Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.